Okay, welcome back to EDH Tutor, and today I've got a deck tech to brew. And surprisingly, maybe misleading, it is not about Rada. It is about Kroxa. Now, the theme of this deck is Discard Tribal. Now, the reason why I built it in Discard Tribal is because I find that limiting the options that your opponents have is going to lead to your victory more often than just generating a crap ton of value or whatever. Because turns out, even if you're not getting the most value, if your opponents aren't getting any value, you're still outpacing them. Now I'm going to start with the crux of the deck, being the mana base. Now there are 11 basic swamps, and there are 10 basic mountains. We'll just fan through them real quick. Now the reason for that is because there are more black pips than there are red pips in this deck, so that's why there is a slight difference in the two of them. Then we have our dual lands. We got Command Tower, the best land of all time. Acume Refuge, tapped, but enters and gives us 1 life. Temple of Malice, another tap land, but gives us a scry, so it can maybe smooth our draws a little bit. And then Rakdos Canarium, just a bounce land, nothing special. And then Sulphurous Mire, the only fetchable dual land in here, and enters tapped, and it's a snow land. It's one of the new Cowtime ones. I'm honestly a big fan. As a budget player, they're kind of cool. And then we also have, for our fetch lands, nothing expensive, but we got Jend Panorama, Grixis Panorama, and Rocky Tar Pit. Now, I found that the panoramas, in my opinion, are better than Evolving Wild and Terramorphic Expanse because the option of having the tap for 1 mana, even if it's colorless, is sometimes so clutch that it doesn't matter that you have to pay 1 mana into it to actually get something out of it. Because I just find that the option of having one... Because you can, if you draw this in your hand, and this is the first land you want to play, versus an Evolving Wilds, you can play a turn 1 Soul Ring or a turn 1 play. With an Evolving Wilds, you simply can't. Now for our utility lands, we've got Molten Slag Heap. I find this is a pretty good mana sink if we've got nothing going on. Isolated Watchtower. Since we're playing Rakdos, we want any support to give us more lands. And those two are the more important lands. And then there's Command Beacon, because we're going to be casting our commander a lot. We don't really want to spend 10 mana or 12 mana for Kroxa after casting it, 6 times. And then there's Encroaching Waste, because you can never really have enough land destruction that is targeted, as long as it's targeting like a Maze of Ith or a Gaia's Cradle or whatever is in your play group. That can be very pesky. Or, in this deck, Sanctum of Eternity. But first we're going to talk about Rix Mahdi Dungeon Palace. Now it's a bit overpriced, but it lets each player, makes each player discard a card at sorcery speed for 3 mana. Technically 4 if you count this as being tapped itself, but for being on a land, not bad. But the best card in this deck, in my opinion, is Sanctum of Eternity. Because how this works is when Kroxa enters, 2 things want to happen. So, it wants to sacrifice itself because it has not escaped. And 2, it wants every opponent to discard a card. Now, you can stack it to where the discard will happen first, and then the sack trigger will technically be on the stack first. So it will happen last. And then you can let the discard trigger resolve, and then in response to the sack trigger, tap this, and bounce it back to your hand. Now that's important that this says activate this ability only during your turn, because it doesn't say at sorcery speed, so stuff can be on the stack. So that's why this is so good, because you can, in response to that trigger, bounce it back to your hand, and maybe get another trigger off of it. And that's the kind of stuff that this deck loves. It loves a little incremental decrease or halt for your opponents, because that's really going to lead you to the victory, because if the opponents have no cards in hand, there's not a whole lot they can do. Now, next we're going to talk about mana ramp and mana fixing. So we've got Traveler's Amulet in here, get a basic land, Rakdos Locket, mediocre Mana Rock. Everflowing Chalice I'm a big fan of, because you can early in the game, use it as a Mind Stone, but later in the game, you can have an explosive turn by just funneling and multi-kicking it a bunch of times. Then we get a Soul Ring because it's amazing, Fire Diamond because it's 2 mana, and then Rakdos Signet because for 2 mana, yes, you have to funnel mana into it, but it is incredible. Burnished Heart because we're not in green, so we really got to ramp in other ways that aren't just artifacts, because artifacts can be blown up, and so can lands, but much less commonly. And then Replicating Ring, a card I'm a pretty big fan of in casual EDH, because the odds of you hitting 8 turns with it are pretty likely most of the time. So you could get 9 total Replicating Rings. And there's a couple cards that we would want to funnel into, namely one where 9 extra mana will win us the game. Now, this deck is all about discarding, so let's focus on the discarding themed cards. Squee Goblin Nabob. Now, this is a great card for discard deck because we are also going to be discarding. So this is discard fodder. With the aforementioned to copy the Kroxa triggers, Wheel of Misfortune, just to, have our opponents discard a hand and then draw a hand. Because even if they're drawing a new set of cards, it doesn't matter because they're still discarding cards. So cards like Magrim let us deal 2 damage to our opponents based on them discarding cards. So if they are drawing 7 cards after discarding 7 cards or 6 cards, whatever it may be, they are still taking upwards of 12 to 14 damage based on how many cards they have in hand. So we got another wheel there. Noetic Scales is an interesting card in here. It basically bounces every person's creatures based on the number of cards they have in hand. So if your opponents have no cards in hand, they will potentially only have 0-powered creatures. Another discard. Davriel is just another discard and potential drain. Because this deck is all about draining our opponents for having no cards. Quest of the Nile Stone, more drain. This one lets us draw cards based on our opponent's discarding. And Voyager Staff, I'm a bit iffy on, but it's basically Sanctum Eternity, but a one-time use. But I figure one time copying that ETB could still be game-winning. Burglar Rat, just another discard. Neheb the Worthy is very good. I feel like he was kind of overlooked as a rare, because whenever he deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. Now, in a game of 4, you have 3 opponents. You're going to have someone open, or at least an okay attack. And if you don't, there are ways to make it unblockable in this deck that we'll get to. Because we also want Kroxa to be unblockable for that attack trigger. Then we got Inquisition of Kozilek. That's just a targeted discard. Minion Reflector lets us copy a non-token creature ETB. And with Kroxa, although we'll sacrifice it regardless, we can copy that ETB for 2 mana. Faith of Devoted. This lets us pay 1 mana whenever we discard a card, or cycle technically, to have each opponent lose 2 life and me gain 2 life, or you gain 2 life. Then we got Mind Rake for some discard. Mages of the Wheel, just another wheel. And Thoughtseize, more targeted remove or discard. Urgoros lets us force an opponent to discard a card at random, and if they can't, we draw a card. So he is kind of card draw, but also taking cards out of our opponent's hands. Liliana Spectre, just another ETB discard. Skull Cage, just another drain. Raider's Wake, just another drain. And then Asylum Visitor is basically like Phyrexian Arena, except on other people's turns, and if they have no cards in hand. Then Bone Miser, incredible card, and it's the reason why we want to discard so many cards. Because whenever we discard a creature card, we make a 2/2 zombie. Whenever we discard a land, we add mana, whatever. But it's really all about that non-creature, non-land card. Whenever we do that, we also draw a card. And then here's our finisher. Torment of Hailfire. Now this card is from Amonkhet, and is incredible. So, it plays along with the discard theme, and can just do a massive amount of damage. But that's all of our discard-themed cards. Next, we're going to talk about removal, because every deck needs it. We've got Walk the Plank. Turns out not a lot of people run Merfolk. So, at least in my play group, if they do, maybe take that out. And then we got Lightning Bolt, the fancy art. Extinction Event, that's just a board wipe. It's very good in Standard. It's okay in EDH, but Exile is very good, and you can kind of finagle with it and be pretty choosy on what you can get. Eldest Reborn is a saga. If I will not drag it down, it has 3 different chapters, but the first one is really good. The second one is really good, and the third one is incredible because it's not just your graveyard. It is everybody's graveyard. So later in the game, when you've made people discard their entire hands or a bunch of cards, whatever, you can get a wide slew of creatures. Murderous Rider is really all about the destroy target creature or planeswalker, and you can also make it a creature. So if you are kind of stuck or you're struggling in the game, you can at least have a blocker. Omni, all about that light or that drawing cards, but also can be removal. In Garrick's Wake, lets us blow up everybody else's creatures, but not our own. Karn Liberated, exile target permanent, that's why it's in here. We can also stop people from having cards in hand, which is always fun. Hex, destroy 6 target creatures. Now, I'm going to take this out eventually, because I kind of am iffy on it, because it's destroy 6 target creatures, not up to. So if you have 3 creatures and your opponent has 3 creatures, you have to choose your own, which is kind of sucky. So I'm going to take that out, but for now that's in here. Then there's Terminate, an amazing card that was recently reprinted in the Prosper Tomebound deck in the AFR set. And then Bone Shards, which I'm a big fan of. It's sorcery speed, but you can sacrifice a creature or discard a card, which is what this deck wants to do, to destroy target creature or player for planeswalker for 1 mana. God, that'd be crazy if it was 1 player. 1 mana kill a player? I'd do that. Okay, and then next we're going to talk about card draw, because every deck needs to draw cards to keep in the game. We've got Disciple of Bolas, because we have some high power creatures. Anja's Ravager. We want to discard cards, but we also want to draw cards. So that's exactly what Anja's Ravager does, and that's what Jalen's Tome does, Rummaging Goblin, Anja Falconwrath. That's what they all do. A lot of the cards in here want us to discard our hand, or discard some cards, like Chandra Heart of Fire, Faithless Salvaging, Seize the Spoils, Faithless Looting, Thrill of Possibility, and Key to the City. They all want us to discard a card to get cards. And then, like Bone Miser, there are benefits to discarding those cards. And then Ransack the Lab, which is basically just strategic planning, but black, which I thought was interesting. Strategic planning was first, notably, so this was just a copy, but very good card, because strategic planning is very good. And then we've got some discard payoffs. So whenever our opponents discard a card, Douthly Voidwalker will exile those, and then we can cast them by sacking Douthly Voidwalker. And there are benefits, or not benefits, there are ways that we can recur him very easily, and we'll go over that in a second. And then there's Turgid, God of Fright. Now say you wheel, and you got Turgid on the battlefield. You are stealing every single permanent that they discard. It's honestly crazy. I don't know how this got past playtesting. This is so good. And then the back is just like, if you have an infinite mana, you can win. Which I guess, like, if you have infinite mana, you should probably win. But, I don't know. Next is Scourge of the Skyclaves. I have found that if I'm struggling in a game, there's no card I want more than Scourge of the Skyclaves, because I can at least take 1 player with me, or at least put them to a point where they're not coming back. And then Atali Primal Storm. Now, I kind of have a weird... it's not weird. I just really like Atali Primal Storm. I put it in every red deck I can, because it just generates you so much value. A potential of 4 cards every time you attack is just so good. It's so good. I can't not put it in my decks. And even if it's making the deck worse, I like it too much. And then we got Chainer, Nightmare Adept. So this is where the recursion comes in hand. So we can discard a card, which we want to do, and cast a creature card from our graveyard. That does not count as the escape cost. So you don't have to exile 5 cards, and it will die. Or you can respond to it with Sanctum of Eternity, whatever you want to do. And then it gains haste, but that's kind of whatever. I mean, it can be good, but for Kroxa, it's whatever. And then Palace Siege, if we choose dragons, we're draining our opponents. But if we choose cons, every upkeep, we return a target creature from our graveyard to our hand. So say we have Dalthy Voidwalker and we want them back on the battlefield. Well, we can bring them back with either of these cards. And this deck isn't crazy powerful. You know, most of the time, you're going to get focused on by your entire table because they don't want to discard cards, especially like the Boros player, because they worked hard for those cards and they don't like discarding them. So you're going to get focused. But if you can get your engine started with Kroxa, or even get a few discard triggers on the stack, or Torment of Hailfire, you can impact the game so greatly. And that's why I like Kroxa so much, because it makes such a drastic impact on the game. But yeah, this was my Kroxa deck tech, and I'll put it on my Taps Out link in my bio on my Instagram. Go follow there, and if you're new to this channel, subscribe. I'm hoping I can start doing this more regularly, but yeah, we'll see. Thank you.